Very good morning, everyone. Welcome to MEL 2022, and today is the second day of the public forum of MEL 2022. And there will be 4 panel discussions that will bring us together to find the answer who is MEL and who is mouse. So before we go into the program, I have a logistic announcement for you. So snacks are available for everyone and is always available at outside. And also for the interpretation headset, if you need to use it, please exchange with your ID card. And we will return your ID cards back when you return the headset to us. And also in the rooms over there, it will be the farmers' room that we will use sometime in today for discussion within the farmers from Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos, and Myanmar. And also, we have an exhibition and the booth at the main hall. And everyone are free to get the magazines, watershed magazines. And we also have the donation box over there for those who want to donate to the activists in Myanmar. And lunch will be provided to those who have name tags only. So sorry for those who haven't registered before you come to this event. Okay, so in this morning there will be 2 panel discussions. The first panel discussion is energy and climate change, the false promise continue. And it will follow by the panel discussion on the meeting the MEL 2022 photographer and filmmaker. So without further ado, let me proceed to the first panel discussion on energy and climate change, the false promise continue. May I invite all the speaker and moderator on the stage. So this panel is organized by LDIM Investment Monitor and Greenpeace Thailand. And the moderator of this session is Gary Lee, Southeast Asian Program Director from International Rivers. So Gary, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel on energy and climate, where we have 3 panelists of great speakers that will share their perspectives on the situation we're facing now and what are the potential ways forward. We are facing a climate crisis, and the production of energy and electricity is making significant contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. So decisions on energy options and pathways will have a major bearing on the region and the global future. Our speakers today will critically examine different dimensions of the intersection between energy and the climate crisis, from the prospects of exiting from coal in the Mekong region, critically examining the development of false solutions like large-scale hydropower in the Mekong, as well as efforts by different groups that are trying to promote better pathways in Thailand and in the region. Our first speaker is Daniel Hayward, who is an independent researcher based at Chiang Mai University that is doing a lot of research on land governance and energy transitions in the Mekong region. He will be presenting about an upcoming report by Greenpeace Thailand called Carbon Dated, the prospects for an exit from coal in the Mekong region. So over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Gary. Let me just set this up on a presentation view. Okay, here we go. So as mentioned, the talk I will be giving this morning is related to some work, some research which has just been carried out with Greenpeace Thailand over the last 6 months. And this report, there's 2 components which I think will be interesting to know about for today. There is a report. It's not quite ready, but it should be with us soon. So please do keep your eyes open through Facebook, through the Greenpeace website, and I'm sure there'll be kind of a publicity drive in the media. And this report will be out soon. In the meantime, during Mail, there is also a small photo exhibition over in the room across the way. So I do invite everybody to go and have a look there. Now, this report takes a very broad view of various issues around energy transition, including climate change, including energy policies around the region, but with a focus upon coal. I won't be able to cover all of the details in the report, so I think the best way to approach it today will be to give you an idea of what is going to be contained, so you can consult the report when it comes out later. And then I'm going to frame some of the main findings through 3 key messages. So that's the aim in the next 10-15 minutes. So there is 3 parts to the report. The first looks through recent developments for an energy transition in the Mekong region. And this covers more some of the latest occurrences relating to kind of climate commitments and energy transition. So we have reporting from the latest United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26 last year. We're looking at the latest status of nationally determined contributions, which are countries' reactions to the Paris Agreement from 2015. We're looking at the prices of renewable energy for a potential transition, the latest on coal financing, and some of the most recent occurrences like the impacts of COVID, also the impacts of the war in Ukraine. So this first section is very much situating ourselves. Where are we positioned now with the potential for an energy transition? The second section of the report gives a sort of state of coal power around the region. And we go country by country, the 5 Mekong countries. And the aim is to give a broad view of what is some of the main energy policy in each country. Where does coal stand in this? So it touches upon coal mining, but principally coal power, where it is, what kind of production and consumption is going on for each country. The third section of the report then brings us to a focus on Thailand. So we're looking into more detail about the state of play of renewable energy. What's the latest sort of modeling taking place? And then in terms of coal, what investment is taking place through Thailand into production and consumption? And in this sense, we look beyond just a domestic production and consumption. We're looking around the involvement of Thai banks and companies in coal around the region and beyond. So this hopefully gives you a kind of a quick snapshot of how the report will look and the kind of topics it covers. So I'll leave that for the moment and then frame some of the main points in terms of 3 key messages. Now the first one is the fact that there is little progress on climate commitments in the Mekong region. And the trend of this talk is we're going to start with the less positive. We're going to get some positive, and then unfortunately we might become less positive again, but we'll do our best. So there's a couple of areas I want to highlight here. Firstly, outcomes from COP26. Now, hopefully you can see on the screen a bit clearer. It's maybe a small table. What I've done, I've mapped out some of the key agreements from COP26 and whether Mekong countries have signed up. And these I won't go through all of them, but there's a couple of examples. There's the Global Methane Pledge, which is pledging between from 2020 levels to 2030 to cut methane production in a country by 30%. We also have an agreement for a transition from coal to clean energy, which is looking for phasing out coal in development countries, seek a transition for workers in the coal industry. So now, I don't need to dwell on this too long, except that hopefully it's very clear that we have a lot of crosses and not many ticks, to put it in very simple language. Basically, there's very little uptake of this from Mekong countries. Or we have commitments for achieving a net zero state, which is the idea of the amount of carbon you put into the atmosphere equates with the amount of carbon you take out of the atmosphere, for example, through your amount of forest or whatever. So we have commitments. For Thailand, it's a very weak 2065, which must be highlighted. Otherwise, we only have Vietnam signing up for some of these commitments, and a very poor showing from other regional countries. I can make one qualification, that Myanmar was not present at the meeting. They had two competing groups trying to join, one for the exiled NLD government and one from the military junta, and neither were permitted to take part. The other area I'd like to highlight is nationally determined contributions, which is policy put forward to cut climate emissions following the Paris Agreement in 2015. Now, the first NDCs were put forward in 2016-17, and these were recently updated last year. At best, we had some countries give some more details, such as Laos and Cambodia, and that means not changing the sort of the commitments for reducing emissions, but saying in which sectors they are looking to achieve these emission cuts. So it's a question of detail. But in other countries, there's been no progress at all, and Climate Action Tracker certainly placed Thailand and Vietnam as being critically insufficient in their NDC updates, and that is their lowest rating that they give. So basically the prognosis here is the state of policy developments in climate action in the region is poor. Very simple message, and more can and should be done. We have COP27 coming up, I think in November in Egypt, and we have to, and one of the big pushes there is towards improving these NDCs, and we have to see, or we have to find a way to maybe highlight this lack of progress in the regions and see how we can push governments to make improved commitments. The second key message is that there remains a great potential for a transition to clean energy. As one example, I highlight the price of renewables. We have two graphs here put together from data from Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, and for Thailand and Vietnam. Unfortunately, the data doesn't exist they haven't done the modeling for other countries in the region. But I think it's very telling in these two cases that within the last 2 years, solar energy has already become cheaper than fossil fuels. And within the next few years, onshore wind will also become cheaper. And what we can see with these graphs is that these costs are going to be continuing to decrease and become much more favorable compared to the price of fossil fuel energy, such as gas and coal. I'd like to show you another graph here. This was some recent modeling done by a team from a mixture of mainly academics from Thammasat University and energy consultants. And they did some very interesting modeling on the potential for achieving phasing out fossil fuels completely by 2050. And what we see here is that there is a focus towards solar energy, and this is for Thailand, apologies. This is exclusively for Thailand. So there's a transition fundamentally towards solar. The potential for solar is extremely positive for Thailand, less so for onshore wind. But what they're looking at is the idea of having solar balanced. Of course, this will produce direct power during the day, and it will be balanced by battery power to store this energy for use during the night alongside a little bit of wind. And it's from this fundamental basis that a complete phase out of fossil fuels is possible. Now, this could be done earlier, 2040, except that Thailand has its commitment to all of these contracts for hydropower and other, which is kind of skewing the system. And so economically, it means the push has to be made to 2050. The end of coal financing. I'm going to have to rush. I've taken too much time already, so I'm going to push through a little bit now. This is another promising area that 95% of foreign investment for plants, investment into coal plants around the world came from 3 countries, South Korea, Japan, and China. And last year, they all made the commitment to halt overseas funding of coal plants. There are ambiguities here. It's still not clear what exactly the Chinese statement represents in terms of, is it for all coal plants or is it only for coal plants that have not achieved financial closure? There's also the pressures of, you have to ask, why do coal plants get built? And it's not always directly around the plants themselves. So for example, there's been proposal for plants in Mekong in southern Laos, which would feed electricity to Cambodia. And it's potential that the actual investment interest is as much about the transmission lines as the coal plant itself. So when we're looking at these things, we really do have to carefully look at what is the investment structure, where does the interest lie, whereby something like that may get built even though the coal plant itself has a huge risk of becoming a stranded asset. And here in the report, I won't look at this in detail, but I give a table which shows the capacity existing for coal plants, and because of the decisions from these countries, it's nearly the same amount that already exists that could be, that is under threat of closure. So, you know, there's potential good news that a lot of coal projects could end up not getting the funding because of decisions from these countries. My and final key message is there remain significant barriers to progress. Now, at the time in COVID, everyone talked about the potential for a new start, a new movement to a green energy transition, and this is not what we've seen as we move out of the most severe phase of COVID. There's been a surge in coal since 2021, especially with use in China, and this has not stopped. What it seems is that as countries are rebuilding after COVID, the attraction of cheap and easy to burn fuel, as in coal, is staying attractive, and all sorts of actually moving towards renewable sources is out the window. So we've seen a huge surge in coal prices. It still doesn't make sense with the volatility of fossil fuels in the light of the war in Ukraine. It makes much more sense to achieve energy sovereignty, which could be done for the example of this modelling in Thailand. And yet, there's still so much vested interest in these fossil fuels for their continued use. So we are still looking at monolithic state-owned energy firms around the region, keeping a control, resisting a transition to a more dynamic, decentralized, clean power system. And there's a large influence of the private sector continuing to embrace fossil fuels. And so for the last few slides, if I can try and rush through, then I would like just to focus a little bit as an example of Thailand. We look here in this graph of imports of coal to the country. And they've not really been affected so much by COVID. It's still going up, ultimately. And most of this imported coal goes towards either independent power stations, so for example in Maptaput, or towards the industrial sector, towards, for example, the cement-making industry. And there is another report by Greenpeace called Gathering Dust that's available online, which looks more into this importing industry. So there is various information about the different Thai companies and their involvement in the coal business. And my main point is that whatever these companies say, they're still achieving a high proportion of their revenue from fossil fuels, from coal. Bamboo in 2020 received 82% of its revenue from coal. They're owning multiple mines and plants around the region, and they are exporting this coal around many countries. So a lot of these Thai companies are involved in the coal business with coal never touching the shores of Thailand. And you have to to really understand Thailand's involvement in the coal industry, you have to take this wider view. Another way of looking at this is looking at the investment by companies and banks. And there's some really interesting information through World, a German NGO that produced the exit coal list. And there's various details in the report that look at Thai banks and companies that directly have shares in coal, domestic and international coal companies, which is in this diagram. And also are Thai banks that are underwriting and giving out loans to companies, both domestic and international. So there are many pressure points here. We have to ask the questions, is this what we want of our banks? Is this what we want of our companies? Actually, if I go back, just one thing I'd like to highlight, we have the Thai Social Security Office investing in coal. Now, if this is meant to be a fuel that is losing its investment power, is there not a risk to people and their pensions that this asset could suddenly lose its value in the future? So we have many pressure points here. So to conclude, there is the high potential for a clean energy transition. The data is there, the modeling is there. In many ways, there should be no excuse. Politically, it makes sense to work towards energy sovereignty as much as possible. And yet, we have the entrenched interests in fossil fuels through multiple institutions in the region. And yet, there are huge risks to this to exacerbate the impacts of climate change. And so I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for highlighting the report, which encourage everyone to read when it comes out, and also saving me the time to do a summary. But I think it was great that you're sort of highlighting some of the key challenges, but as well as opportunities in terms of pushing for a phase out of coal, but also, you know, particularly with your key messages in terms of the commitments that are being made aren't being translated into practice, as well as the institutional structures and vested interests, which are posing barriers for a rapid transition, because that is also a key feature, not only in the coal sector, but as our next speaker on the topic will talk about, is also very much relevant to the hydropower sector in this region. So it's not just about one country, but it is regional with global interconnections. Our next speaker is Carl Middleton. He's the Director of Centre for Social Development Studies in the Faculty of Political Science at Chulalongkorn University. He will be discussing about the rapid expansion of hydropower in the Mekong Basin and region, as well as some of the claims that are being made by proponents on how dams can help adapt and mitigate climate change impacts. Over to you, Carl.
Actually, thanks. Great, thank you very much. First of all, I'd really like to thank the organisers of Meow for inviting me to join the panel today, and thank you everyone for turning up to join this discussion. I hope that this will be useful for you. I wanted to talk about rivers as the best climate solution, and also to bring your attention to some of the claims of the sort of sustainable hydropower narrative that is emerging as a way of trying to push hydropower as being the climate solution, which it's not. So I'm mostly going to reflect on the Mekong River, but I think that there are many other rivers around the world that face similar challenges still, and especially people that depend upon the rivers. So although this region is changing very much over the past couple of decades, it's still very important to start by making clear that rivers are very central to millions of people's livelihoods around the region. And this is for a range of reasons. It connects to fisheries, it connects to agriculture, it connects to culture. So in that sense, it's still very important to be recognizing that free-flowing rivers are very central to the region's identity and to livelihoods. It's also important to recognize that, at least for the Mekong, but for many other tropical rivers, the character of the river, the flood pulse, is very important to the reasons why there is significant biodiversity and ecological productivity that, again, is very important then for people's livelihoods and well-being. I'm not sure what you can see on this screen. I'm just going to keep going. Okay. This graph, I'm just trying to show the extent to which the river has changed over the past 3 decades. On the bottom timeline, it's over the last 50 years. And then on the y-axis, it's the amount of megawatts. And what you can really take from this diagram is that really at the beginning of the 1990s, the river was largely free-flowing still. There were some important dams that had already created disruption, especially in northeast Thailand. But for the majority of the river basin, it still had essentially a relatively connected ecosystem and hydrology. But since the 1990s, there's been a very rapid expansion of large hydropower construction. As of 2019, there's 89 large or medium-scale dams built within the Mekong Basin, with a further 14 in China. Oh, sorry, a further 14 under construction and 30 at a planning stage. So the bottom line is that the river basin is increasingly shaped by the operation of these dams and their reservoirs. Where is the electricity going? The electricity is largely being sent outside of the Mekong Basin to major urban centers where there's a lot of high populations and economic activity. In some ways, it's shifting from a watershed to a power shed. There's also an environmental justice dimension here because it means that a lot of the impacts that are experienced from these projects are experienced within those that live nearby to the river, whilst any understanding of a benefit of cheap electricity is transported a long way away by the high voltage transmission lines. Okay. I think one thing that's really important to recognize is the ownership of these projects. So earlier projects, large dams that were being built, were largely state-owned. So we can still say that there are impacts associated with them, but partly the idea of state building the projects was for some idea of a public good. Nowadays, most of the projects are being built either wholly by private companies or some form of public-private partnership. What we need to understand from that is the whole rationale of building the project is shifting from mainly being about some idea of societal or public good, even if that selling electricity. A number of the projects are being proposed as public-private partnerships, meaning that they are both state and privately owned at the same time. And this makes the situation even more complex, because if there is some form of idea of public good through the state's work, then it becomes conflated with profit generation. So if we understand that this is a process of privatization, then also we can see that the commons that were the basis of the Mekong River before have become increasingly enclosed. And you can see this most directly locally around projects, from the reservoirs that are constructed and immediately downstream from the impacts. But we can also take a step back and see the progressive enclosure of the wider basin, because the impacts also are experienced further away from the project sites. So the way that I would see the river basin now, that it's still partly a commons. People are sharing the resources, are cooperating around them, and it's partly enclosed at the same time due to the private activity in the basin. We could spend a lot of time, and I'm sure there's a lot of you in the room that would like to discuss on this, about the various things that have been happening in the basin over the years. Obviously, I can't do all that in one presentation, but just to kind of flag that some of the issues that have come up, aside from the construction and operation of large dams on the tributaries in Mekong, on the tributaries in the mainstream, there's also been the issue of rapids blasting and navigation in northern Thailand going into Laos and then up to China as well. And then most recently, there's been a lot of questions about how the river has been changing. So the low flows or the drought and the issues of floods and the ecological consequences that have come with this. And there's been some form of conflation and a lot of questions asked about, well, is it climate change? Is it hydropower? Is it some combination of the two? It's really important to be clearer on this. There's also a lot of geopolitics around the basin that are having impacts on the ground for people's lives. So again, I'm not going to discuss this in detail today, but there's the Mekong River Commission that's existed since 1995, which is an intergovernmental organization of the lower countries. Then recently, since I think 2016, there's been the Lanchang Mekong Cooperation, which is a China-led regional organization with all 6 countries as members that has also been active in transboundary water governance as well. And then there's many other regional frameworks, some of which have existed for a long time, like the Asian Development Bank's Greater Mekong Subregion and the ASEAN frameworks, and then others that are more recent, such as the US Mekong Partnership. Again, there's lots that we could say about this, and I'm happy to answer any questions or go into a discussion on it. What I would say is that there's an intensifying hydropolitics or geopolitics between the states and the kind of geopolitical alignments around organizing around water. But I would also make a suggestion that actually a lot of these frameworks are talking the same language. They basically share the same idea that the river should be increasingly turned over to some form of sustainable economic development. So although they might appear like they're conflicting, they're actually also cooperating and holding a particular viewpoint that might be different from many of the people and civil society in the region. Something that's significant that's happened recently has been the increasing sharing of water data. The intensity of the politics of this came to a peak in 2020 and 2021 when there were low flows in the Mekong Basin. And then at the same time, there was also a report that was published by a US consultancy called Eyes on Earth that used satellite data to suggest that water was being stored in China. And this was amplified through regional media and some of the some civil society groups. So again, a lot has been written and spoken and debated about this. What I want to point out is that, so China agreed to release more data since 2020, still very incomplete, but releasing more data. And just looking online, you can see there are various websites with now increased reporting on water data, physical water data in the basin. I would actually say that that transparency is a step forward from before. But at the same time, we need to be clear that the experience of people in different localities around the basin is not accurately represented just by water data alone. There needs to be a lot more to be done to connect people's lived experience of the river to this type of data sharing. In fact, this type of data sharing is as conducive to further economic expansion and water infrastructure building as it is to a kind of ecological justice of a form. So the second thing to comment on this is that water data alone doesn't institutionalize accountability. So actually, there's been a strong and important civil society movement emphasizing the accountability aspect of the interstate cooperation rather than just talking about water data sharing alone. So turning to that accountability and a really important court case that has been ongoing in Thailand for almost a decade. So there are people in the room that I just wanted to mention it as something important that happened that concluded a couple of months ago. So the Mekong People's Network and up to the Supreme Court, that was a case the own Xayaburi dam that has been built and is now operating in Laos. So not to go into too much detail on this case, but to say that it was a really important case in making the connection between decisions in Thailand, projects being built in Laos, and cross-border impacts back onto Thailand and the wider region, on the one hand. On the other hand, the ruling I couldn't personally quite follow the logic of, in the sense that they disconnected the state's agreement to sign the power purchase agreement from the actual impacts of the project. I don't understand that myself, because you can't have a project without a power purchase agreement. It's central to the whole financing model. So first of all, just say this is really important, and I think should be seen as a form of success of civil society in Thailand and the region to push forward on these accountability mechanisms, but clearly there's more to do now. I wanted then to talk about some other kind of knowledge politics that I see emerging. So I've already mentioned briefly that there's kind of increasingly a kind of an obfuscation, like a lack of clarity on whether it is climate change or hydropower projects that are causing impacts. Actually, there's quite a lot of reports that have documented impacts of large hydropower projects in the basin. But recently, there's also been a study that has issued preliminary findings from the Mekong River Commission from a program called GEMS that has started to suggest that some of the projects only have moderate impact. So actually, this contradicts some of the earlier publications that have been released, including through the MRC. But I would say, I think that aside from the question of whether projects should go ahead, there's also going to be more attention now to really demarcating what are the impacts of these projects. Very important. I don't think it's useful to just emphasize all of these state-to-state cooperations. We need to be clear that actually civil society has been really active in talking about the river and furthering other ideas about the river in many other forums. So for example, these are just a couple of forums that have happened this year that are kind of transboundary discussions about the value of the river, the impacts on the river. The one on the left is talking about whether the river should have legal rights. The one on the right-hand side was an academic and civil society discussion in Mafalawang University. There are also many different types of knowledge. There's various research networks that have been producing different types of research. And also, very importantly, different types of community and civil society initiatives on the impacts of projects and different types of solutions, different visions for cooperating around water and water commons that's embedded into local context and local culture, and then connecting between different localities in the basin. So in the last few slides, I'm just going to quickly flag some trends that are useful to be aware of. One is this emerging, or now fairly consolidated, discourse of sustainable hydropower. Like, this has been institutionalized within the region, within organizations like the Mekong River Commission, the International Hydropower Association, which is a global body that is representing a number of the large hydropower companies, has also been promoting this as a solution at the UNFCCC in Glasgow and beyond. For example, did you know that there's now a global hydropower day organized by the International Hydropower Association to celebrate sustainable hydropower? I would rather be joining the International Day of Action for Rivers, to be honest, but it's important to be aware that these examples of global PR are shaping perceptions about hydropower's role in climate change as a solution. It comes partly from the rebranding of dams as being just concrete infrastructure to being development projects in themselves. And one of the examples of those claims is within this region with the Nam Turn 2 project. There is research that shows the questionable claims of, I mean, in many aspects, aside from the actual impacts on lives and ecosystems, it's certainly not always the case that hydropower projects do result in low emissions of carbon emissions. There's been studies in this region that show that this actually has to be studied on a case-by-case basis. A last thing to flag is the question of a shift towards the claim of design flows and climate adaptation. So projects are starting, the Mekong River Commission together with the Lanchang Mekong Cooperation and other scientists as well have started to connect together the possibility of managing the river through the operation of hydropower cascades with some form of recreation of nature in a sense. In other words, that there's a way of managing the cascade to have some form of recovery of the ecosystems. The science has been questioned by a lot of other scientists. Most recently, there's also been an initiative by the LMC MRC about managing the dams for climate adaptation. So this is kind of another stream of the way of framing hydropower as being a solution to climate change and adaptation. I think Daniel's already mentioned this. I think this is a really important point. Even though I've talked only about hydropower, the main decision-making is upstream. It's actually in the way that energy is being planned and thought about. And I think what's really clear from the previous presentation and from other civil society discussions is that energy is a public issue. It's not a technical issue alone. There are technical dimensions, but the impacts of energy and our energy futures makes it a public discussion and a public decision-making process. So there's a range of reports. I won't go through these in detail. I think really important, we have to think critically about the future of the river. Like, there's actually, as I said at the beginning, a kind of assumed future of the river that is central to economic growth. That's a very narrow vision, and it reflects a particular way of thinking about development. We need to widen the discussion of different types of futures beyond what's being discussed at present. Okay, so I'm out of time, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up with some ways forward. One thing, I think that we need to talk more about the river as being a commons. Like, revisit and reaffirm the importance of rivers being common, things that are common between different people. Second, for the dam impacts and water data, there needs to be a lot more space for communities' own experience of the impacts and recommendations for way forwards. And there needs to be a clearer transboundary accountability mechanism around the impacts. On accountability, we've been discussing recently that there's a lot of things to learn from the past about the future. There's a lot of promises that have been made in the past that were never kept. So in terms of accountability, we should look backwards first about what the actual promises were made that had been made are versus what actually happened on the ground. And then also, I personally think that human rights approaches for transboundary water governance are a way of clarifying the duties of states and how they should be responding to people's expectations. And then last, I think we need to have more discussions about other futures beyond what's been discussed at present, including ideas like the rights of rivers and the idea of rewilding rivers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carl, for a very comprehensive presentation in a short period of time, as always. Just wanted to touch upon a few things you mentioned, I think, to sort of show that linkage between the physical transformation of the river to also some of the institutional dynamics, which also Daniel touched upon, particularly in terms of some of the actors involved and the challenges and opportunities that brings about for cross-border accountability. And I think you emphasized in that question earlier on and that point around environmental justice and the key question of who benefits and who bears the cost, and where the space is available to advocate for greater accountability and justice for those that are most impacted. And linked to your comment in terms of some of the thinking and way forward about moving upstream, our next speaker will be sort of touching upon some of those issues, who will sort of talk a bit about some of the questions she'll try and address in her presentation. Will be mainly focusing on Thailand. But as we heard from both the previous presenters, Thailand's role and situation as a large energy consumer, but also as a key investor, developer, and financier of energy-related projects in the region, plays an important role. So what will it take for Thailand to realize its decarbonisation goals? Do we need hydro, gas, or coal for Thailand to meet energy needs? Is another pathway or better pathways available? So our next speaker is Greacen. She's an independent energy researcher, currently mainly based in the US. She has been involved in public interest research and analysis on energy and plans in Thailand for over 20 years after leaving the Energy Planning and Policy Office, and her current research mainly focuses on decarbonisation pathways for Thailand. Pichom, I can't see you, but over to you. We'll be joining online. Can people see? Sorry, we can't. Please bear with us while we deal with technical.
Okay.
ได้ยินไหมคะ
ได้ยินแล้วครับได้ยินแล้วครับ
แล้วเห็นจอไหมคะเห็นจอที่แชร์อยู่ไหมคะ
เห็นจอครับผม
โอเคได้ค่ะได้โอเค Hi everyone, I'm Greacen. Zooming in from the US. Sorry I can't be there in person. Thank you so much, Gary and Pieng and Mel for inviting me. Yeah, so today I would love to share a little bit about some research that I've done with Thammasat University on, what will it take for Thailand, if Thailand were to meet our climate, the climate goals that the government has announced at COP26. What will it take? What would that look like? And what are some of the implications on not just Thailand, but also neighboring countries? I'll touch on that. The study that I was part of focused primarily on Thailand, but I will try to, talk about the implications on other countries in the region as well. So you can see the screen, right? And you can see the second slide. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the thumbs up. So the government actually announced, I think as Daniel mentioned, that Thailand initially did not have a very aggressive climate target. Initially, it was that the government was hoping to achieve carbon neutrality by 2065, but I think due to some peer pressure and last minute change of mind, now Thailand actually has announced carbon neutrality goal by 2050 and net zero goal by 2065. So I guess I won't go into details very much, but basically carbon neutrality means that the goal of offsetting carbon emission can be achieved through offsets from other sectors, whereas net zero means that that we have to really reach the 2065 net zero greenhouse gas emission means everything, including methane emission from agriculture, also has to reach net zero. So that's the difference between carbon and net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So for my study, actually, I was trying to see, okay, the government make a quick announcement to adopt this target, but there was no analysis at all to back up the target. So our attempt to do the study was to try to see, okay, if we really want to meet the targets that the government has set, what will it take? What would that look like? And in our study, our scope only focused on electricity sector, and this also includes transport, because transportation will also be electrified. But basically, that's the extent of the analysis that we covered. And so there are other sectors that we will that are not included in the study. But just looking at electricity alone is actually complex enough. But to also think about other sectors too, that's even more complex. And currently, Thailand's power sector trajectory based on the current approved power sector plan is as shown in the graph as blue line here. So you can see that here we start in 2020, and if we were to plan the power sector based on the approved power development plan, which is called PDP, then the emission is actually going to go up, not down. And we need to, somehow make it from here all the way down to zero by 2050. So that is not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. However, I think we need to, before we look into the future, we also need to look at what the situation is currently. And in the case of Thailand, we actually have a lot of surplus capacity, and this has caused really significant economic burden on consumers, and is being felt very keenly right now, with inflation, with energy prices going up. So we have kind of a perfect storm right now of several problems. Some of the factors are external, like market price of energy going up, that's caused by, partly influenced by the war. That's not under our control. But what's really under our control is how well do we plan power sector expansion, how many power plants do we need. And in the case of Thailand, we have had repeated mistakes of always planning for too much capacity. And this graph, this table actually shows plant utilization rate of independent power producers. So independent power producers are IPPs. They are mostly gas power plants or coal power plants. And red color, if you have, when you see red or zero, it means that the plants do not get used during that month. If you see green or if you see blue, it means that these plants, have very high utilization rate or normal utilization rate. Normal is, maybe around 80% or 90%. So you can see, this is just a symptom of excess investment. So what we have is that, there's so many plants that are just like that are not being used at all. They just sit in, they are not being put to use at all. However, because of the way the contract is structured, consumers still have to pay for just the power plant just being there. And this is part of the problem that we have in this system, in that, once the power plants get built, they come with power purchase agreements that guarantee a certain amount of return. So basically, if you can get a PPA, a power purchase agreement, you are guaranteed to make safe and pretty generous returns on the investment. Unfortunately, though, this means that the burden for paying these power plants, fall on the shoulders of consumers. So as you can see, we have very serious problem of having too many power plants, and the power plants are costing consumers a lot of money. So, how do we get from here to the future where we want to, decarbonize the Thai power system in a way that's affordable and ecological responsible? So in the study that we did, we try to, draw new lines. So instead of, the blue line going up as the government has planned, we try to see, what are the options in trying to meet different targets. So the government has announced a target that's shown in red line, basically meeting net zero by 2050. But we also explore other options. What happens if we want to meet the target 10 years earlier? Or what happens if we don't reach net zero, but we actually try to use forest absorption to offset the emission? So basically, we still leave some emissions from power plants, but we try to offset it through planting more trees, or doing mangrove rehabilitation, to absorb more carbon. So these are the different scenarios that we explored. And we also looked at some sensitivity analysis, including demand response and looking at different scenarios of gas prices. One thing that I want to mention is that in the past, the way planning has been done in Thailand and also in other countries in the region too, is that typically, they only look at conventional power supply options, and that means, coal, gas, nuclear, and that's basically it. And so renewable energy and energy efficiency are treated as inputs. They are not treated as candidates on the same level as conventional power plants. So they are treated like an afterthought. And that's why, the traditional way of planning for power sector cannot optimize solar and other renewable energy options. So we try to kind of, do it in a way that actually accounts for, the needs for the future to really go low carbon. So we used a new planning tool called Switch 2.0, which is an open source program, and we were able to therefore optimize energy efficiency, different types of renewable energy, energy storage, and demand response. And our approach was to try to, take care of the carbon requirements while meeting energy planning requirements, the technical requirements of maintaining security and maintaining reliability. So these are just the different elements of the model that we try to model. One thing that I have to mention is that, while we look at a lot of things, including electric vehicles, addition of electric vehicles, we did not look into, we did not look at transmission expansion requirements. So we only focus on generation and energy efficiency, demand side management. And the way to try to simulate, the future of power sector is to first look at, what are the requirements in terms of the demand. This graph shows the historical projections versus actual demand that happened. So these different colored lines were official demand forecasts done by the government, by the Thai government. And the blue bars down here represent the actual peak demand over the past 3 decades. As you can see the trend. It used to be exponential growth before, and that's why the government used exponential curve to project the future demand. But as it turned out, it's no longer. It's starting to be like an S curve, right? You start to see, steep climb, and then with the economic crisis and so on and so forth, you start to see a leveling off. Once we achieve 100%, more or less 100% electrification, the demand is no longer growing at an exponential rate. But the government continued to, project way higher than the actual demand actually turned out to be. And the latest demand forecast, which is the basis for the PDP 2018, the current one that has been approved, is the black line here. And as you can see, it's already way, higher than the actual demand in the blue lines here. And so we reforecast. We try to be really conservative. Conservative in the sense that, we don't want to make demand too low. So we still feel that this is probably going to be likely too high given the trend that we've seen on the blue bars. But this is what we used for our modeling. This is the projected demand that we input into our model. And just to break down that demand, so the electricity demand comprises what the utilities, EGAT, MEA, PA, these are the generation, transmission, distribution utilities, project as having these are the electricity demand within the 3 utilities. But we also increasingly have demand that's being met through rooftop, solar rooftop, for example. People start to self-generate electricity, and so that cuts into the energy requirement. As you can see, right here, this is on the megawatt basis. This is on the gigawatt hours, and then the blue is the added piece that comes from electric vehicles. So as electricity, as vehicles convert from gas internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, then we have the added load from the transportation sector. So the total demand is actually this part. So that's the basis for the electrical needs. And then in terms of the energy choices that we considered, we only look at commercially available low carbon technologies. So we only look at proven technology. We are not including technologies that will likely become available in the future, but we don't have the cost for those right now. So we therefore only look at solar, wind, batteries, which are just lithium ion at this point, although there are so many other options right now, but we only look at lithium ion, and biomass, and also gas. Notice that we do not include any new coal at all. In fact, the government actually just approved addition of new coal project, in Mekong, 600 megawatts. We do not include that. And we also do not include hydropower beyond the, what we already have existing. So right now, the Thai government is on the verge of approving, of signing contracts with 5 more projects, all of them in Laos. So we try to see, okay, what happens if we don't try to make use of those projects because they were not committed. So we only look at existing hydropower plus 3 pump storage hydropower projects. So these are projects that basically, on existing dams, they install an additional turbine to be able to pump water to absorb excess electricity during the day from solar power, and then pump it and store power in the reservoir at night, and then during the day, and then at night when electricity is needed because the sun is not shining, then you can release the water and make up the shortfall because the sun is no longer shining. Anyway, so these are the main options that we considered. And here are the cost assumption of different technologies. So the outcome of the modeling results is that, this is like a daily snapshot of the same day every year, and we did it in a 5-year interval. So in 2022, this is what the load looks like. The difference is that the blue line represents the load, the demand for electricity plus EV, and the orange line represents electricity that needs to be dispatched by the utilities. And there's a small gap between the orange and blue initially is because of self-generation by consumers. So in industries or even residential customers, some have electricity, have solar capacity on their roofs. So that explains the difference between the blue and the orange. But as you can see, as we grow, as we try to decarbonize the power sector, there will be more and more generation during the day. And at night, then there will be a difference between the load and the generation, particularly from solar. And this area has to be made up by batteries. So this is what it looks like in details. So so during the day, as the power system decarbonizes, then you have pretty really high electricity generation by solar during the day, represented in the yellow color. And then that energy is used to charge up batteries that will then release energy at night when the sun is no longer shining. And the remaining generation requirements will come from solar, biomass, and initially a little bit of gas, but depending on scenarios, we may still have gas all the way up to 2050. So if you look in terms of the energy mix, you'll see that in the future, this is on an energy basis, most of the electricity will come from solar, but energy efficiency, the red color, will play a big role as well. And so this is solar, rooftop solar, self-generation. This is utility scale solar, and this blue is wind, and the red is energy efficiency. So these are the energy sources that will grow significantly from where we are today. The part that remains stable, at least in our assumption, is that hydro will continue to generate electricity to meet our needs, but we do not need to rely on new hydro projects in Laos that the government is considering right now. And the parts that are going to be phased out would be, these two, which are coal. So coal has to be phased out really soon in order to be able to meet the trajectory of the carbon cap. And gas, CCGT, the brown one is combined cycle gas turbine. So gas will be slowly phased out, but over time it would take longer. And depending on the scenarios, sometimes we may still see gas, combined cycle gas turbine, even in 2050. And this, and the bottom part is, the green is biomass, and the orange at the bottom is battery. We need a lot of batteries in order to, as you've seen in previous slide, that you need energy storage to be able to balance the supply and demand throughout the day. And this is the capacity mix. So that was on energy basis, and now this is on capacity basis in megawatts. You can see that, we need massive amount of solar, 300,000 megawatts in order to be able to meet the needs in year 2050. And these are different scenarios that we try to look at. The central scenario that we looked at was this one in the middle, the achieving the government target with no offset. But if we were to, yeah.
Sorry, can you wrap up in 2 to 3 minutes, please?
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So yeah, this in the case that we want to offset the emission, to allow gas generation to continue for longer. And this is in the case of rapid decarbonization, if we meet the targets by 2040. And so we use all those scenarios and compare, like what would be the difference in terms of cost. And we found that the cost difference is not very much. If we want to decarbonize very quickly, the cost will be 8% higher than the central case here. But if we don't offset at all, if we want to delay decarbonization by doing carbon capture and storage, we actually have to pay more in order to sequester the carbon in the ground. And that is the scenario. And this is, if we were to, we are able to offset by planting more forests, or basically, or taking away from other sectors. So these are just, some of the findings from the study. And this is the slide comparing various plans. So basically, it's doable. Then the cost difference, there's some cost differences, but in general, electricity will go up in the future, particularly since this was done based on assumptions before all the inflation, massive inflation that we have seen in the past year. So it likely going to be higher. So what I'm trying to say is that it's doable technologically, but the question is how do we have the political will to make it happen, and do we have the capital needed in order to make the transition happen? And it's not easy. We could pretend that this is this could just be done through technology, some technological experts will take care of the problem for us, but in reality it's not that easy at all, because there will be land use issues, labor, and so on and so forth. So without trying to address underlying assumptions about, the way our economy grows or the way we consume electricity, it's going to be rather challenging to get down, to meet the electricity needs and also to meet the climate targets. And also, as you can see that we have had a lot of problems with the current planning system where the investment in the electricity sector is so disconnected from the actual demand. And without trying to reform the industry structure, without trying to introduce more accountability, it's going to be really difficult to break up the monopoly and the repeated mistakes that keep on passing on costs to consumers. And so my policy recommendation is that we really need to take a pause and stop new projects and really reform the planning methodology and the accountability system in order to make sure that we can actually move forward in a way that really benefits the majority of the people and also take care of the environment. So yeah, that's the end of my my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Pichom, for that presentation. I think it's a really exciting and important piece of work. And I think linked to what sort of Carl mentioned about the importance of looking back to look forward, I think what Chom's presentation clearly highlighted, there has been a history of over forecasting future demand, which in turn then has been used as a rationale for continued expansion and building of power projects. And, as that table showed, some of those power projects, nothing was used throughout a whole year period. And also highlighting that there is a need to change the way planning is done, and there are the tools to do it that are available. And I think to highlight that, but also in Chom's policy recommendations and what she highlighted, yes, some of these are technical, but the changes we need aren't just technical. It is also political, about reforming and restructuring the way planning is done to call for greater transparency and accountability and meaningful participation. And also, it is important that work is being done at this upstream level on the power development planning, which does link with the work that are being done by civil society and other groups, whether it's on coal and hydropower. These are all linked. So now we have about 10-15 minutes for question and answers. So open the floor to any of you to ask questions of any of the panelists. Don't be shy. Yes.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I just would have liked to heard more about the legal rights aspect to the Mekong. How far are we on those developments, or is it just the really beginning? Thank you.
Thanks for this. In some regions of the world, this discussion has moved along a long way. I think probably the most well-known case is the Wanganui River in New Zealand. There's also been a case in India as well that ultimately was withdrawn, but still indicates a general move. There's more discussion in this region, and I personally find it really important, not necessarily because the rights of river might be the final form in which this new recognition of the importance of nature takes, but rather just an overarching shift to recognizing the need to rethink our relationship with everything that is not human. So I think there is a discussion on the legal rights of nature. It may not be the final thing that emerges, but the discussion is starting, and I think that's important. Thanks. And if others also would like to share on this, it would be good to have a good discussion on this. Thanks.
But ជំរាបសួរខ្ញុំបាទឈ្មោះក្រុមវេទ
មកពីខេត្តសៀមរាបប្រទេសកម្ពុជាបាទខ្ញុំមានបញ្ហាការព្រួយបារម្ភបាទនៅទន្លេមេគង្គខាងក្រោមនៅទន្លេសាបបាទព្រោះអីខ្ញុំនៅជាប់នៅបឹងទន្លេសាបមួយរយៈកាលក្រោយដែលមានទំនប់វារីអគ្គិសនីនេះកើតឡើងបាទធ្វើឲ្យទឹកទន្លេបាទទឹកទន្លេវាមានការថយចុះបាទ2 ម៉ែត្ររៀងរាល់ឆ្នាំហើយវាប្រឈមនឹងបាត់បង់ពូជត្រីល្អជាបន្តបន្ទាប់រៀងរាល់ឆ្នាំបាទហើយការព្រួយបារម្ភនេះទៀតទៅអនាគតខ្ញុំព្រួយខែងទឹកទន្លេនឹងអាចរីងស្ងួតបាទនៅបឹងទន្លេសាបខាងក្រោមបាទ
I'm living in Siem Reap province. My concern is that after building the hydro dam, it causing the Tonle Sap become like lower, it around approximately 2 meters in each year. So this is like a causing very trouble, especially like the fish species has been declining repeatedly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Akun Tralambong. I think this is a really, it's the issue that's catching a lot of the news headlines, and it's clearly really important because there are still hundreds of thousands of people that depend directly on the fish of Tonle Sap Lake. It points out to the lack of kind of genuine accountability between the wider trends of project development in the basin and people who are being affected. I think probably one thing that I would add to this discussion, though, is the importance to recognize it's a range of issues. Like it's definitely recognized that partly it's the infrastructure. It's also partly about changes in agriculture as well and changes in like the landscape around Tonle Sap. So we need to connect these things together. But ultimately, what I would really focus on is what's the outcome for people's lives, and then who has to take action. What does the government need to do, and what do others need to do? But I think, thank you for raising this really important point of the changes that are happening in Tonle Sap Lake.
Ba chim riệp số cái nhóm chia cả cái co mọc pì khai cặp bột tới Campuchia nhóm cha bà đom từ lục bình đất này nhé đây lục miền bờ sông Mạnh Bình Tha nước Campuchia nước miền cách sân giá bẩn thoi ca chết polปี 2000 មក20ដល់ឆ្នាំ2000ប្រហែល2050បាទប្រហែល 50% បាទអញ្ចឹងជាក់ស្ដែងក្នុងបច្ចុប្បន្ននេះដែលប្រជាពលរដ្ឋនៅក្នុងសហគមន៍សង្កេតឃើញក្រុមហ៊ុនដឹកធ្យូងថ្មចូលយ៉ាងគំហុកដែលមិនតែប៉ុណ្ណោះគេមានគម្រោងនឹងកាយយកធ្យូងថ្មនៅដល់មានជ័យប្រទេសកម្ពុជាទៀតហើយនឹងមានគម្រោងបង្កើតរោងចក្រធ្យូងថ្មនៅស្រុកឧត្តមសាគរខេត្តកោះកុងហើយជាក់ស្ដែងដែលខ្ញុំជាការរស់នៅក្នុងតំបន់ខ្ញុំនៅជិតរោងចក្រស៊ីម៉ង់ប្រហែលជា 8 គីឡូអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលមេឃអ៊ូអាប់យើងពិបាកដកដង្ហើមព្រោះគេយកធ្យូងថ្មទៅប្រើប្រាស់ក្នុងរោងចក្រស៊ីម៉ង់បាទអរគុណ
I'm from Kampot. I'm interested with Danya presentation about the Cambodian commitment, like I reduce the carbon, how say like sorry, like carbon. Carbon emission, sorry. And then he said that my experience, like the government, it currently like import a lot of coal to be like a coal plant, and they are willing to like take the coal in Dorminjay province also, like to supply the coal plantation, coal plant. And then he said in the future they are going to build it in Koh Kong as well to supply the power. And he said based on my experience, I live in Kampot near the cement factory. So when the weather is bad, it causing because that factory using coal, you know. So the emission causing the people is really hard for breathing. And So that's the agreement between the Cambodian government and those party will be like effective in the future, or just like a agreement without any effective way? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for your comments. I think what you say also reminds us that we are talking about climate change and these sort of potential long-term effects of climate change. But this is a good reminder that for fuel use such as coal, there are immediate, direct pollution effects which have direct impacts on local communities, and it's very important to remember that too. When we talk about the contracts, and this is where we really come to some of the problems when we talk about the energy governance in the region, in that these kind of deals are so opaque that it's very hard as an outside researcher to get a clear image of who exactly is behind the deal, what sort of money is exchanging hands, are they really going to take place? So these kind of questions are extremely difficult to answer. You're right that Cambodia imports a lot of coal. It has some reserves, but not many. Do these future projects, such as in Mekong, go ahead? Now, my understanding is that in many cases they have not achieved financial closure. They have not brought all the money in already, which would principally come from Chinese banks. So there is a possibility that they will not be able, if China follows through with its commitment not to keep funding overseas projects, it's quite possible that they will not get built. But such is the nature of these projects, it's very difficult to give a clear answer, yes or no. So I can't give a categorical response. Just as one other comment, one thing I was shocked to come across looking at Cambodia was if we think in terms of what is the potential for a transition to renewables towards a decentralized system, it's something like it's actually illegal to produce your own electricity, or there's some context where it's extremely limiting for renewables, say rooftop solar to take place in Cambodia. And so there's clearly a long way to go to bring in the kind of governance that is needed for an energy transition. Thank you.
We have a questions from audience from Facebook. Why are energy costs increasing for family across the Mekong region country as supply outpaces demand? On its face, this would contradict basic market economic theory. Why are energy costs increasing for families across the Mekong region's country as supply outpaces demand? On its face, this would contradict basic market economic theories.
Chom, I think, did you get the question? We can't hear you. If you can hear us, the question was basically around why are the electricity costs increasing for families when supply is much greater than demand? Doesn't this contradict basic economics?
Sorry, there's so much echo. I had a hard time hearing, but maybe I'm going to rephrase the question. So why the prices increase across the Mekong countries, and how come the supply and demand do not behave in a way that's something? Sorry, I really had a hard time hearing.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Maybe you can type in the chat or something. Yeah, okay. I can hear better now, yeah.
Why are the costs for consumers or families increasing when supply is much greater than demand? Doesn't this contradict basic market economics around?
Oh, yeah. Okay, now I get it. Well, if you have a functional competitive market, that would be the way you would expect, how it works. When there's a surplus of demand, surplus of supply, then electricity price should come down, right? But that's not what we have in electricity. For electricity in particular, is a monopoly business, and because the way it's structured in Thailand, particularly, and probably in other other countries in Southeast Asia as well, the utility has the monopoly to pass on costs to consumers because there's no competition. Therefore, even though there's a surplus of capacity, electricity cost doesn't come down. All the costs still get bundled together and then get passed on to consumers. So consumers have to. So if consumers were to conserve, then this is particularly true for Thailand. I'm not sure about other countries, but in Thailand, if you reduce demand, then electricity gets even more expensive because the cost will get divided by smaller number of units. So it's like a fixed cost kind of thing, and then that get passed on to consumers. So if we can't introduce some kind of competition, even competition by comparison, then we are likely not going to be able to get out of this kind of system. We hope for, a reform that we love to see is to, for example, to allow small scale producers or communities or provinces to manage their own energy system, allowing for competition between, even though it's not direct competition, but if we have diversity of management system, maybe that would allow for, to provide the necessary incentives for, better investment decisions, more effective planning for the future, that more responsive to the needs of the local people. Thank you.
Okay. พี่วิทูลครับ
Hello. Yeah, I just want to say hi to Chom. I think when we look at the transition, right? Talk about transition, especially on energy sector, we always might talking about the technology transition or fuel transition from the fossil fuel to renewable. But yeah, as Chom mentioned in Thailand, but in particular, for her planning, her study is, I mean, technically be possible, right? No question. But in reality, in practice, right? That's a big question. She mentions about the process of planning, PDP, Power Development Plan, but that is, again, not just, we get too much preserve margin, but who own those preserve margin? Also a question, right? And so that is make me back to the question of transition. Who's gain, who lost from transition, or who are the victim from transition? Right? We're talking about the shifting from coal to whatever coal. So the question is the raising of standard, right, of developed country might push, right, the coal or the gas, the fossil fuel market, right, move to lower developed country, or in the case of Thailand, you can see that when we're talking about the commitment for carbon, for zero carbon in my view, without changing of the structure of the market of electricity in industry, electricity industry structure, we cannot achieve to this. Even dam from Mekong, right? It's still a very cheap option for EGAT, right, to buy compared to the other option. Even we have so much reserve margin, and there's a complex interest, right, within the industry. So then, yeah, the question to me is how, when we globally talking about the transition, right, how can we also looking at, I mean, now it looks like everything will be answered by the market, market mechanism, right? Carbon credit and whatever. But those always pushing the burden, like in Thailand when they're talking about the zero emission, it means that they want to growing more forests, right, to absorb the emission rather than really making a big change or revolution on energy sector, right? So my reflection is maybe want to hear from the panelists that, yeah, how can you going further to those really, changing or transition, or how can you help to suggest the mechanism that will provide the moving of the burden, right? Or how can you not shifting the benefit from the from the industry to the other sector? So that might be my question. Thank you.
Chom, would you like to start? 1 second. Wait, พี่ชมรอสักครู่ครับยัง Okay. Right now?
Okay, can you hear? Okay, yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, we really cannot rely on the market mechanism at all. In fact, we really, because this is in a way a failure of the market. The pollution is externalized, not reflected in the cost of the fossil fuel. Therefore, the government really needs to intervene. One way to, there are actually many different mechanisms. The way it's done in Europe and the US is, through carbon pricing. For example, Europe is doing, is taxing carbon, and then you do that by impose added price, a tax on fossil fuels or on energy sources that will emit carbon dioxide, and the revenues collected then will be used to incentivize green energy investment, or even to offset some of the additional costs that consumers may have to bear. So there are many different ways to do it. And that's one way of doing it. And another way is just by issuing, through legislation, issuing laws that says that, the targets will have to be achieved. Otherwise, there will be penalty, and then then utilities will then have to comply by the law. And in the case of Thailand, I don't know if that's very likely, but at least the government will have to issue some kind of, at least the government can do the plan, because in other countries, it's actually, the planning is more market-based, whereas in Thailand, it's very centralized. So the government can do a lot just by issuing the right policy or approving the right energy plan. And the same would, the same can be said for Vietnam and for Laos as well. The central planning is still pretty much the dominant way of planning in this region. So the government can actually, do a lot. We just need to make sure that the government is serious about it, or the people have to hold the government accountable. But yeah, there's still, and that's a big if, because currently the way the planning is done, the benefits are skewed toward energy corporations, investors and financiers at the expense of consumers. So we really have to change the accountability and and the governance of the energy planning in order to make sure that in the future the consumers will actually, the public will actually benefit. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Okay, thanks, Chom. I got the microphone because I wanted to say hello to Piwatoon as well. So I think, first of all, the question is really good. And you basically point out, like, there is a rationale to the whole political economy of the current energy industry, which Chom is also kind of outlining. It has its own incentive structures. It's kind of tending towards centralized and big companies that are mostly, if not all, entirely motivated by profit, responding to the market. So I think there are important kind of quite practical steps that have been taken. Chom has outlined some. The case on the Zaiburi Dam, I think, is another example of trying to find strategies to make more accountability beyond the energy system alone emerge within the current legal systems of the region. But I think in order to really answer this question, we need to move upstream even of energy planning, to be honest. We actually need to talk about more of a fundamental ethical and social shift in the way that we think about what is the purpose of all of this electricity in the first place. So I think partly it's a question of distribution. Actually, I can see Larry Lohman is in the room, and there was a really important report that made me think a lot about what's the purpose of energy in the first place. And I think that's a really fundamental underpinning question. Like, why is all this energy needed? Who benefits the most? What types of services is it providing? What types of industries is it supporting? So the priority should be a question of redistribution to meet immediate needs of people meeting their basic needs who are in some form of material poverty. But actually, my impression is that more electricity goes into quite energy-intensive industries that are concentrating profit. So I think maybe the bigger question is around, like, how does the current economic system more widely incentivize the political economy of the energy sector? So the shift, I think, is actually along the lines that's just been introduced with the rights of nature as one example of moving towards a different relationship between people and with nature as well. Like, there's more and more discussion about the age of the Anthropocene, and there's debates about the name of it. But one thing that we can say is that phenomenon like climate change means that we can no longer ignore our relationship with the rest of the world around us beyond the humans. It's in our politics. So one way or another, there needs to be this new agreement worked out, a new relationship between people and people and people and nature, where perhaps profit accumulation plays less of a role compared to other imperatives.
As I try and make a quick comment, it's a very telling question. For the case of Thailand, I really do not have an answer for you. I'm still searching where is the sort of spaces within all these barriers that are set up for an energy transition. However, I am fascinated by what has happened in Vietnam. And I didn't speak much about Vietnam in my presentation, but there was this sudden surge in solar projects from 2018. And in fact, if you want to look, there is plenty of Thai innovation and incentive and investment towards solar, and most of it has been around the region, but not in Thailand, and a lot of it went to Vietnam. You see a lot of Thai companies there. obviously now the problem there has been that infrastructure is not kept up with the power development investment, so that it's actually been limited. The government has now put a cap on solar production. But I'm fascinated with the fact that there are clearly competing voices within a very centralized Vietnamese government. There are clearly voices that are lobbying for the renewable sector, that are looking to a world beyond coal. Nuclear is another question there. But I do wonder, say, whether it's not directly comparable, but I do wonder what lessons we can learn from the example of Vietnam. With solar, there's also been a surge in wind now. So maybe it's one pointer we could look at. Thank you.
Sorry, we are over time. Oh, sorry, Chom, did you want one last? Oh. Sorry, hang on one sec. They're just changing plugs.
Hello?
Okay, quickly. Yep, should work.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to also add to what Carl said. I feel like, you know, what Vitun was asking is also tied directly to democracy. You know, we really need to, you know, centralized planning has a lot of problems, and the fundamental economic system is the way it's set up, you know, really kind of goes with the centralized political power. And yeah, we really need to return the power to the people more. And you know, the transition cannot happen without an improvement in public participation, in democracy, in people having a say, and in, you know, having diversity of players being very engaged in the implementation and decision making in the energy sector and other sectors. And yeah, rights of nature is also an interesting legal framework that not just legal but also cultural. I feel like, yeah, the cultural underpinning of rights of nature, you know, is like a paradigm shift that could also be really interesting to look at as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chom. We're going to have to wrap up. I think the concluding comments pretty much sort of summed up how I wanted to do it. So just to sort of thank the panelists, but I think, you know, what's clear is the challenge isn't really technical. It is political and about power. So going forward, thinking through, for those of us in the room and beyond, how we can ensure that the justice and the rights of people are central to energy transitions and to democratize the decision-making on what those energy transitions and futures look like in this region. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and please thank the panelists. We're over for now. Cheers.
Thank you very much to Gary for moderating this session, and thank to all the speakers as well.